Back on News at Prime. Let's continue then that conversation moments ago, speaking to the ANC Youth League Secretary General Nkosazana about the calls for young leaders to be given more position of power. Asanda, good to have you. Thank you very much for coming on. Is the ANC ready for that conversation? Although there are, here and there touches of praises for leaders like Ronald Lamola, etc., etc. But is the ANC ready to have broad-scale conversation around young people coming into the fold?
Well, I think, the ANC has had some young people come in. If you remember, there are the young people who are part of the Fees Must Fall movement, who are now part of education portfolios and who have been, in various leading positions. So I don't think it's necessarily a matter of that young people are not coming through at all, but I think it's more a matter of that there are so many old people in, the most senior positions that it's difficult for the young people in the pipeline to move through the pipeline in the ways that they should. And also what it's done is that it's created a kind of blockage where you've got people like Stella Ndabeni and various others who are 40 plus, but are still seen as young, even though by the definition of South Africa, you stop being young once you are past the age of 35. And so those people are still referred to as young, even though they're not technically young, and they're still waiting in some ways for more senior positions or more stronger portfolios in ministries, but it's not possible to get those because you've got a lot of older people who are still occupying those positions. Is
it wishful thinking on the part of the ANC Youth League to think that now that Dr. Nkosazana Zuma will not return, we don't even know what their fate will be, whether they will be returning as the leaders of government, but to think that that particular portfolio will be replaced by a young person?
Well, I don't know if it necessarily will be replaced by a young person. I think, there's just so much going on with the ANC in the present moment, and there's so many kind of constituencies to try and appease, and there's so much infighting and so much uncertainty about even who is with the ANC and who's likely to move to the MK, and that it's going to take a bit of time to kind of see where where everything is going to land, essentially.
Is Nkosazana Zuma sincerely moving to retirement out of, I suppose, the goodness of her heart? Let her couch quite cleverly to say, well, I'm retiring from Parliament. Doesn't necessarily say she's completely out of politics.
Well, I think it is possible that maybe she'll end up in the MK, but I think, if you look at her age, if you look at, the amazing portfolio that she holds in leadership, I don't know if she necessarily would want to tarnish that portfolio by joining a new political party that's still going to have its own issues, whether they are teething issues or whether they are very real issues of credibility based on who is, part of the formation, because we've seen a lot of the people that are part of this formation are the so-called members of the RET, of the ANC faction.
But is this then likely to amplify the voices of young people in the party to say, well, take the example, take the leaf of the book of Dr. Nkosazana Zuma, retire, you are over 70, for goodness sake?
Well, that all depends on what the ANC Youth League does and the kind of lobbying that it does. And I assume, interviews like the one they've just done is, one of the ways in which they can and are lobbying for more young voices. I think, we are a very young country. If you look at our population, the majority of, the members of the population of South Africa are young people. And so we do need a lot more youth representation than what we have at the moment. And we do need a lot of the people who are currently in government to vacate in order to make space. And I think, people of Nkosazana Zuma's generation really did an amazing job. Like when I look at her portfolio and the kind of legacy that she has left, she's done a really amazing job. If you think about, the work she did with ensuring that South Africa is cigarette free, ensuring that public smoking is no longer a thing, And also, most importantly, she was the first minister of post-apartheid South Africa, and basically helped to move South Africa's health system from an apartheid system that didn't have access for black people, that didn't see black people as as deserving of public health services of the highest level. And you're also talking about somebody who was a doctor, who qualified as a doctor in such a tumultuous time, in such a time where black people barely could make it into the education system, never mind the very real impediments that were put in place. And of course, we also saw her shining and rising to become the chair of the first woman chair of the African Union, and raising the voice of women at the African Union, and fighting very hard for gender rights at the African Union, in a continent that really doesn't do much by way of gender rights advocacy. And she put her head on the block, and she advocated for women and women's rights during her chairpersonship. And if you also look at, the work that she did in the foreign ministry, where South Africa was still coming out of, being a post-apartheid state, and we now are a country that enjoys, one of the only countries actually, that enjoys quite a wide range of diplomatic representation. South Africa has some of the biggest, in terms of number, agencies, is represented globally, one of the largest contingencies of representation, and also has one of the largest representations of foreign countries in the world. And so that is not something to, sniff at. She's also credited for having been part of pushing for AU reform. We know that South Africa pushed very hard until it managed to enter the UN Security Council, which is something that before the attempts by South Africa was seen to be something that was impossible, by the way. And, of course, also credited with helping with a lot of conflict resolution, a lot of engagement and conversations around the continent, and security and conflict, which, although when we look now and we see the number of conflicts that are in Africa, we can forget or not remember what it actually felt like in that time period, where for a moment there was hope that Africa could be conflict-free, and for a moment there was hope that Africa and security could be something that wasn't about conflict, but was more about securing states and securing people, and ensuring that there is peace for all on this continent. And so I think she's done a stellar job, and I think, her work is to be commended. The ANC would really be so lucky if they could produce leaders like her. And I think, one of the biggest kind of blots on her legacy has been the constant kind of connection of her name with her ex-husband, Jacob Zuma. But, this is what always happens to women. Women are connected, forever, even after a person is an ex, are connected to the people that they were once married to. And then, of course, there are various scandals that did come up in her tenure, just thinking about the Dalai Lama visa scandal when she was Minister of Home Affairs, and also Sarafina too, and some of the scandals around that. But over and above, all of that, I think, overall, if you look at, 1994 up until now, she's done a really amazing job, and we'd be hard pressed to find another cadre, not of her generation, but of the younger ones, who actually has as stellar a portfolio and a legacy. And I really wish her well, and I think she's done an amazing job, particularly for encouraging women to enter politics and to stand, on their own, and to have, sometimes controversial positions on things, and to stand on their truth. And that's something that we really lacked before her and many others of her generation joined politics and became leaders.
So with all those accolades, what would say one box that she didn't tick, although she tried at least twice, is that of being the first woman president of South Africa. Is it too early for her to write her autobiography?
Well, I think that, first chair of the African Union, that's a continental position, which I think is bigger than being the South African president, because that's continental influence. I also think, having led that foreign affairs portfolio and some of the work that she did is really the kind of work that some presidents never even get to do. So I think if I was her, I would definitely be writing my autobiography and reflecting on my life and times. And I think that, in part, I think part of why she didn't get the presidency is because there was this connection to Jacob Zuma, which seems to kind of follow her and dog her and basically has this shadow over her. But I also think in part it's because South Africa hasn't been able to see itself as being led by women, despite the many women who are in politics and despite the many women who lead in South Africa and who have shown themselves to be capable of the kind of leadership that this country needs. And I really hope that, 30 plus, after 30 years of democracy, that this country is really going to consider women leadership as a reality and not as a kind of by the way, and also not as a kind of, there are these factions that are fighting, let's present somebody who's a woman just so that women can vote for them, but rather that we present candidates that, are going to be in positions of power based on their credentials, which she did have. But unfortunately, as I said, her connection to Jacob Zuma and, the ways in which he was just followed by scandal and some of the things that he did in his leadership, they really, I think, played a large role in ensuring that she failed in her attempt to become the president.
Asanda Ngoasheng, I appreciate your time.